Imagine waking up one day and realizing that the stranger you've spent your whole life trying to outrun is you. You open your eyes in the soft light of morning, the world's still quiet, but before your feet even touch the floor, a familiar heaviness settles in your chest, a weight you cannot name, a weight that feels older than memory itself. You glance in the mirror, and for a brief moment, you swear you see someone else looking back. Not a ghost, not a hallucination, but a presence you've learned to ignore, a presence that has always been there. This is the paradox of being human. The person you fight most bitterly to suppress, deny, or erase is not someone out there. It's the part of yourself you've buried so deeply that you can no longer recognize it. Yet it leaks out every day, in every action, every word unsaid, every judgment you cast, every sudden anger or inexplicable shame. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the hidden dimension of the psyche that contains everything we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves. The selfishness we mask with politeness, the envy behind our forced congratulations, the rage wrapped in our smiles, the desires we label unacceptable. But here's the uncomfortable truth. These parts don't disappear just because you deny them. They grow, they harden, they wait. Have you ever wondered why, despite your best efforts to be better, you keep finding yourself caught in the same patterns? Why you sabotage relationships? Why your fears feel irrationally unshakable? Why your insecurities seem to multiply the harder you work to conquer them? It's as if no matter how much you clean the surface of your life, the dirt keeps seeping back through the cracks. That's because you aren't just fighting bad habits or negative thinking. You are at war with yourself and losing. What if the battles you fight every day against procrastination, against shame, against that whisper of inadequacy are not failures of discipline or morality, but symptoms of something far deeper? What if they are signs that a part of you, long neglected, is clawing its way to the surface? Jung believed the shadow isn't simply evil. It's everything you cannot or will not face about yourself. And here's the terrifying realization. The longer you refuse to look at it, the more power it has over you. Think about the last time you judged someone harshly, with a heat that felt disproportionate. Why them? Why that? Why so strong? Jung would tell you that it wasn't really about them. It was about you. Every judgment, every irrational irritation, every unexplainable obsession might just be your shadow projecting itself outward, desperate to be seen. And yet, we live in a culture that tells us to stay positive, to rise above, to focus on the light. But how do you transcend something that's chained to your ankles? How do you find peace when you're carrying an entire part of yourself like a corpse you can't acknowledge? Here lies the central, unbearable question. What happens when the self you've been running from finally catches up to you? You willing to meet it? Will you spend your life frantically constructing walls made of perfectionism, its moral superiority, endless distractions only to watch them crumble under the quiet force of what you've repressed? The truth is, your shadow will not disappear. You can drown it in productivity, numb it with entertainment, silence it with toxic positivity. But the shadow waits for the quiet moments when you're alone, when you're exhausted. When life strips away the roles you planned, it whispers, "You cannot escape me, because I am you." If that realization unsettles you, good, it should. Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." But how do you make the darkness conscious? How do you confront the parts of yourself you've spent years burying? What happens if you do? This is not an academic exercise. This is an existential reckoning. Because whether you face it or not, your shadow is shaping every choice you make, every love you lose, every fear you obey. And so the question becomes, if you cannot escape your shadow, what do you do with it? You can't escape your shadow because you didn't create it by choice. It was forged, piece by piece, in the crucible of survival. To understand why it exists, you need to go back not just to your childhood, but to the blueprint of the human psyche itself. When you were a child, you came into the world raw, unfiltered, and unashamed. You expressed anger when you were hungry. You screamed when you felt fear. You laughed uncontrollably at things that made no sense to anyone but you. Soon you learned the rules. You discovered which emotions earned you love and which earned you rejection. You learned which parts of yourself were acceptable and which had to be hidden. Carl Jung understood this process intimately. In his view, the shadow is not inherently malevolent. It is the repository of all the aspects of yourself you were forced to deny to survive in society. We all have a dark side, he wrote, and if it is not recognized, it controls us. Think about that. What you exile does not disappear, waits for you in the dark, influencing you in ways you cannot see. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche saw this too. He warned that the suppression of our instinctual nature, demanded by moral codes and social conformity, creates a dangerous tension. Be careful, he wrote, lest in casting out your devils, you cast out what is best in you. To become good, many of us amputate the very qualities that make us whole: our anger, our ambition, our sexuality, our hunger for freedom. Those exiled fragments do not die. They become the shadow. This isn't only personal, it's cultural. Modern society doesn't just encourage repression, it institutionalizes it. From a young age, we are taught to curate our identities, to be palatable, to be pleasing, to be productive. We post filtered images of our lives, carefully edit our opinions to match the crowd, and adopt the mask that will least offend. Jung called this our persona, the mask we wear for the world. But what happens when you over-identify with that mask? When you become so busy performing your acceptable self that you lose sight of who you actually are, that's when the shadow begins to grow teeth. Arthur Schopenhauer, the philosopher of suffering, once said that much of human misery comes from self-deception. We build illusions about our goodness, our moral superiority, our control, and then we suffer when reality betrays us. The shadow is the reality behind those illusions. It's the raw truth about who we are, stripped of all masks. Jung went further. He believed that the shadow is not only made of bad traits, it also contains our suppressed potential. All the talents you dismissed as unrealistic. The desires you live. But here's where it gets psychologically dangerous. The more we deny these parts, the more they seek expression in unconscious ways. This is why Jung warned that what you resist persists. Think about the sudden rage that erupts over something trivial, the envy you project onto others, the self-sabotage that ruins opportunities you claim to want. These are shadow eruptions, moments when the repressed forces within you take control. And it's not just individuals, societies have shadows too. Collective shadow dynamics are why entire cultures scapegoat minorities, why nations commit atrocities while believing they are righteous, why groups dehumanize outsiders to preserve their self-image. Jung observed this in the lead-up to World War II, warning that unacknowledged shadows, both personal and collective, would inevitably manifest in destructive ways. Why then do we keep running from this part of ourselves? Because facing it is terrifying. It shatters the image we've constructed of who we are. It forces us to confront the possibility that we are not as purely good, as rational, as in control as we like to believe. It challenges the very foundation of our identity. Jean-Paul Sartre once said that man is condemned to be free. Freedom is terrifying because it means responsibility. Facing your shadow is the same. Once you see it, you can no longer blame fate or society or your past for everything. You must take responsibility for the hidden motives behind your actions, for the parts of you you'd rather pretend don't exist. And yet Jung argued that this confrontation is the only path to wholeness. There is no coming to consciousness without pain, he wrote. You cannot integrate what you refuse to see. You cannot heal what you deny exists. So here's the hidden problem. We think we're fighting external enemies. Our bosses, our parents, our partners, the unfairness of life, but more often than not, the war is internal. We battle the projections of our own disowned parts. It's endlessly caught in a cycle of blame and avoidance. But here's the deeper, more unsettling truth. Your shadow isn't only made of darkness. It is also made of light, of unexpressed creativity, of raw power, of truth so profound that your conscious mind wasn't ready to hold them. Right. The shadow isn't trying to destroy you, it's trying to make you whole. The question is, will you listen, or will you keep running? Knowing that the part of you you fear most is also the key to everything you're searching for. If the shadow were only a philosophical abstraction, we could ignore it. But it isn't. It is woven into every decision you make. Every relationship you enter, every word you speak in moments of heat or fear. And its influence doesn't politely wait for your permission, it seeps into your life silently, like a poison you can't taste until it's too late. Think about your relationships. Have you ever wondered why you keep choosing partners who hurt you in similar ways? Why you sabotage the relationships that seem most promising? Jung would say this isn't random, and this is your shadow at work, pulling the strings from behind. The curtain? We are drawn to people who mirror the parts of ourselves we cannot face: our neediness, our aggression, our demand. Then we punish them for exposing us to our own reflection. This is the phenomenon Jung called projection. What you despise most in others is often what you cannot tolerate in yourself. It's why your coworker's arrogance makes you disproportionately angry, because deep down, you know you crave recognition but won't allow yourself to admit it. It's why your friend's lack of discipline enrages you, because a hidden part of you longs to be free from your own suffocating perfectionism. When you cannot integrate your shadow, you weaponize it against the world. And this isn't confined to personal life, which shapes entire societies. Whole nations project their shadows onto outsiders, vilifying other groups to preserve their illusion of moral purity. Jung saw this in Nazi Germany, where the unacknowledged shadow of collective rage and humiliation was projected outward, turning millions into enemies. He warned that ignoring the shadow on a societal level doesn't lead to peace, it leads to catastrophe. On a personal level, consequences are quieter, but no less devastating. When you deny the shadow, you fracture yourself. You live half. A life one built on the persona you perform, while the real you rots underground. You become disconnected from your instincts, your creativity, your raw vitality. You wear a mask so long, you forget what's underneath. You might think this is safe. After all, isn't it easier to suppress the rage, the envy, the shame, than to let them out? But the cost of that suppression is staggering. Psychologists now know that repressed emotions don't just disappear, they manifest as anxiety. Depression, addiction, psychosomatic illness. The body keeps the score as trauma. Researcher Bessel van der Kolk famously said, "Your shadow lives in your nervous system, whispering through panic attacks, insomnia, and inexplicable fatigue." And what about the spiritual cost? You may think you are a good person because you avoid your darkness. But Jung believed the opposite. When you refuse to face your shadow, you become morally vulnerable. Unacknowledged evil doesn't vanish, it moves in secret, influencing your actions without your awareness. This is why the most destructive people often believe they are righteous. They are possessed by a shadow they refuse to see. There's another layer, the cost of lost potential. You don't just bury the bad, you bury the brilliant. Your shadow contains the fire you dimmed to make others comfortable, the courage you labeled reckless, the desires you exiled to fit into someone else's story of you. Every time you deny these parts, you deny life itself. Consider how many dreams have been abandoned because people believed their shadow was unacceptable. The artist who never paints because their creativity feels self-indulgent. The leader who stays silent because their ambition feels arrogant. The woman who swallows her rage, never realizing it could fuel the boundaries she needs to build a better life. In this way, the shadow doesn't just haunt you, it starves you. The scariest part? The shadow is patient. It will wait decades if it must. It will surface at your weakest moments, in the fight that ends your marriage, in the breakdown that derails your career, in the quiet despair that makes you wonder what all your striving was for. Jung described midlife crises as the moment when the shadow, long ignored, demands to be reckoned with. What you have ignored, he warned, comes back to you with a vengeance. And yet, you've been taught to see all of this, the breakdowns, the anger, the projections, as failures. But what if they are messages? What if the shadow isn't your enemy but a guide? Jung believed that the shadow, once faced, becomes the doorway to individuation, the process of becoming whole. But most of us never get there because we live in denial. Why? Because confronting the shadow feels like death, requires dismantling. The story you tell about who you are, the good person, the selfless partner, the competent professional. It forces you to admit that you are not as one-dimensional as you pretend to be. That's terrifying. But here's the paradox. The parts of you you most fear might be the very parts you need. Your anger could become your boundary. Your envy could become your ambition. Your shame could become your compass for deeper healing. When you integrate the shadow, you don't become more dangerous. You become more human. Yet we keep running. We numb ourselves with endless scrolling, distract ourselves with overwork, medicate ourselves with substances or toxic relationships, all to avoid hearing the shadow's call. And still it finds us. The consequence of ignoring the shadow isn't just suffering, it's living a life that was never truly yours. A life dictated by fear, projections, and unexamined scripts. Which brings us to the question you can no longer avoid. What if the only way out isn't to keep running, but to turn around and face what's been chasing you all along? So how do you break free from something that lives inside you? How do you rebel against a prison you built for yourself, brick by brick, out of fear, shame, and survival? Carl Jung didn't believe in easy answers, but he believed in liberation. And liberation begins with a single act of defiance, turning to face what you've spent your life running from. The rebellion starts not with self-improvement, not with fixing yourself, but with radical honesty. Jung called this process shadow integration. It means shining a light on the darkness, not to erase it, but to understand it. It means asking yourself questions that cut to the bone. What do I judge most harshly in others? Why do I keep sabotaging my happiness? What do I fear people will discover about me if I stop pretending? The answers will not be pretty, they will sting. But that pain is your first taste of freedom, because every truth you name loses its power over you. This is why Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Facing your shadow is the act of dragging your hidden patterns into the light and admitting this was me all along. It's terrifying, but it's also the first step toward becoming whole. So how do you do it? The first step is observation. Start noticing your triggers, the moments when your reactions feel bigger than the situation. That flash of anger, that sting of jealousy, that gut-clenching shame. Instead of numbing them or deflecting them onto others, pause and ask, what part of me does this belong to? The shadow reveals itself in those extremes. The second step is self-confrontation. This doesn't mean just thinking about your flaws, it means actively engaging with them. Jung often had his patients use journaling, dream analysis, and active imagination, writing conversations with their shadow, allowing its voice to speak. He understood that the shadow doesn't respond to suppression, it responds to dialogue. The third step is compassion. This might feel counterintuitive. After all, aren't these the ugly parts of you? But here's the paradox. You cannot integrate a part of yourself you continue to despise. Think of the shadow like an abandoned child. It lashes out because it's been ignored. When you turn toward it with curiosity instead of condemnation, it begins to soften. But be warned, the shadow is clever. It hides behind rationalizations and self-deception. It will tell you that your rage is justified, that your sabotage is bad luck, that your patterns are everyone else's fault. This is why humility is essential. Jung believed you need a container strong enough to hold these revelations: a therapist, a mentor, or even a trusted community that won't let you sink into self-delusion. This work is not safe. It will break the neat narratives you've built about who you are. It may destroy your persona, the mask you wear for the world. But that destruction is sacred. As Nietzsche wrote, one must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star. The chaos you've buried is the raw material for your transformation. And yet, the rebellion isn't just inward. It's also against the culture that taught you to fear your shadow in the first place. Society benefits from you staying small, predictable, easy to categorize. But shadow integration is an act of spiritual insurgency. It is reclaiming the parts of you that were shamed into silence, your desires, your power, your unapologetic authenticity, and refusing to apologize for them anymore. This is why. Jung saw individuation, the process of integrating the shadow, as not only personal, but archetypal. It's a journey every soul must take if it wants to be free. In mythology, This is the hero's descent into the underworld. In religion, it's the death before rebirth. You do not become whole by clinging to the light. You become whole by descending into the dark and emerging with the treasure you thought you'd lost. And what happens when you do? You stop projecting your pain onto others. You stop fighting battles that aren't really yours. You stop living for a persona that was never you to begin with. You gain access to an energy that was locked away in repression, the boldness to set boundaries, the creativity to build what you've only imagined, the courage to face life without running. But perhaps the most radical gift of shadow work is this. You discover that what you feared wasn't a monster after all. It was the exiled parts of you longing to come home. This rebellion is not glamorous. It will cost you your illusions. But what you gain is far greater. Your integrity, your vitality, your selfhood. And here lies the deeper rebellion. To stop being a stranger to yourself. Yet even as you begin this work, a greater question waits. If integrating the shadow is the path to freedom, then what lies beyond it? What does it mean to truly live as a person who has faced their darkness and survived? That is where we must go next. What happens when you stop running? When you finally gather the courage to meet the thing you've spent a lifetime avoiding you? Expect to find a monster, but you don't. You find yourself. Not the version of you polished for social approval. Not the one sculpted by family expectations or cultural conditioning, but the raw, unfiltered, terrifyingly real you. And in that moment, you understand the deepest truth of all. The shadow was never your enemy. It was your teacher. This is the revelation Jung spent his life trying to share, that the darkness within you does not exist to destroy you. It exists to complete you. The shadow isn't just the storage room of your shame and guilt. It's the hidden archive of your unlived life, the parts of you that were cast out. Waiting patiently for your return, you begin to realize that your fear of the shadow was, in truth, a fear of your own power, that deep anger you've buried. It was always trying to teach you where your boundaries were, the envy you loathed in yourself. It was pointing you toward the unlived desires you're too afraid to claim. Even your shame, the heaviest, most suffocating part of you, has been trying to guide you toward the authenticity you abandoned long ago. This is what Jung meant when he said, "The gold is in the dark." The very qualities you thought would ruin you are often the ones that, once integrated, set you free. And here's the most unsettling part. The shadow doesn't just contain your personal wounds, it connects you to something larger. Jung saw the unconscious not only as personal, but as collective. Your shadow links you to the archetypal struggles of humanity. Our capacity for cruelty, yes, but also for transcendence. When you face your shadow, you are doing more than self-help. You are participating in the oldest, most sacred human act, wrestling with the soul's darkness so that it can birth new light. This reframes everything. Suddenly, your breakdowns, your sabotages, your cycles of pain aren't meaningless. They're messages. They are the psyche's way of saying, cannot keep living as half a person. The final realization is this. Freedom isn't the absence of darkness. Freedom is learning to walk with it. We are so used to thinking of growth as overcoming, as rising above, transcending, moving past. But Jung rejected that. He didn't want you to escape your shadow. He wanted you to integrate it. Because the more you exile parts of yourself, the more fragmented you become. Integration is wholeness, is becoming someone who can hold both, light and dark, without collapsing under the weight of either. And in that wholeness, you stop playing the false roles. You stop pretending to be endlessly virtuous, relentlessly productive, permanently unbroken. You become real, messy, complex, alive. What does that life look like? It's quieter than you. Expect it's not about some grand spiritual enlightenment or sudden perfection. It's about being able to sit with yourself without flinching. It's being able to see your flaws without self-hatred, to recognize your desires without shame, to admit your wounds without drowning in them. It's no longer needing to project your pain onto others because you've made peace with its source. It's walking into a room and no longer needing to perform a persona because you finally understand you are more than the mask. Perhaps this is what Viktor Frankl meant when he wrote that when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. You cannot change the fact that you have a shadow, but you can change your relationship to it. You can meet it with curiosity instead of fear. You can stop seeing it as the enemy of your higher self and start seeing it as the missing half of your humanity. And once you do, something astonishing happens. The shadow stops chasing you because it no longer needs to. You've turned toward it, invited it to sit at the table of your life. And in doing so, you dissolve the illusion that you were ever divided in the first place. This is the final liberation, to live as an integrated being, unafraid of your complexity. To know that you are capable of rage and tenderness, of destruction and creation, and to hold all of it with responsibility. To be neither saint nor sinner, but fully human. Jung didn't promise that this path would make life easy. In fact, he warned that it would likely make it harder, at least at first. But he also promised that it would make life real. "I'd rather be whole than good," he once said. Wholeness, not false goodness, is the goal. And so, the question you are left with isn't whether you have a shadow. You do. It isn't even whether it has power over you. It does unless you claim it. The question is this: are you willing to meet yourself? Because the longer you delay, the louder the shadow will knock. It doesn't matter how fast you run or how brightly you shine until you answer that knock. A part of you will always remain in the dark, but if you can answer, if you can, walk into that darkness with courage, you will find what Jung promised to all who dared to make that descent. Not ruin, not damnation, but the self you were always meant to become.